everything in reality except the one unconditioned reality is a conditioned reality. Now I've got all these conditioned realities that constitute all of the rest of the set of all reality. And every one of those conditioned realities must be dependent upon a finite number of conditions, which means it has a terminating condition which ultimately fulfills its conditions. And that final terminating condition must be our one unconditioned reality, the only one that exists in the whole set of reality. Therefore, what can we say? We can say that the one unconditioned reality is the ultimate ground of the conditions for all the rest of reality. It is the ultimate ground of conditions for all conditioned realities. And since all reality is conditioned realities except the one and only one unconditioned reality, you can say, shorthand, that the one unconditioned reality is the ultimate ground, that is to say, the final terminating condition upon which every other conditioned reality, everything in the whole set of reality depends. So, we go then to St. Thomas Aquinas' contention that our one unconditioned reality, our one pure acting power, our one absolutely simple reality, our one unrestricted reality, not in the sense of an infinite plane or something, but in the sense of an acting power which has no intrinsic or extrinsic limits, restrictions, or boundaries, our one and only one unconditioned reality now must be the ultimate ground of the conditions of every single thing in reality except itself. Of course, we know the cause of itself is impossible, so it must be being itself. Now, what is another easy word for that? Creator. Yeah, the one unconditioned reality, since it's the ultimate ground of everything else that is, the one unconditioned reality, quite literally, has to be the creator of all else that is. Now, if you got that, then get this. St. Thomas goes even further. He notices that conditioned realities can never become unconditioned realities. Now, there's a proof for this, but it's a little complex, and I'm not going to give it to you today. But there is a simple way of seeing this. If you can only have one and only one unconditioned reality, that's all you can have, then no conditioned reality can ever become an unconditioned reality. No conditioned reality can ever, as it were, take care of its own existence or its being. The conditioned reality will always have to stay a conditioned reality, and therefore, if this conditioned reality is conditioned by time, that conditioned reality is going to be dependent upon the unconditioned reality at every single moment that it is. You see, what St. Thomas Aquinas is trying to say here is when the unconditioned reality is grounding, as it were, all conditioned realities. And by the way, it grounds, conditioned realities not by absorbing them into itself. These things are totally different, right? They're finite. They have finite boundaries. They're completely distinct from the unconditioned reality. Now, the unconditioned reality is literally fulfilling their conditions. If I could use an analogy, the unconditioned reality is thinking them into existence. The unconditioned reality is thinking all conditioned realities into existence. I use the word thinking here in the sense of a mentative act, not something like a brain wave, not something like a content in my brain. I'm talking about a mentative act of absolute acting power, the mentative act of a pure, reflexive, simple act of existing. It's thinking the whole universe. No, it's thinking everything else that is into existence. But here's what Thomas is saying. Since no conditioned reality can become an unconditioned reality, then it must follow that the unconditioned reality must be fulfilling the conditions of every conditioned reality at every single solitary moment that it exists. And if God stops thinking about us, we're in trouble, everybody. If God stops thinking about us for one single moment, poof, I mean literally, we're nothing. If God stops fulfilling the conditions of our existence, and we are radically dependent, dangling participles, as Thomas Aquinas would put it, as an ends, a mere ends, compared to God's essay, the infinitive of to be, right? If God should stop thinking about us for one moment, if the absolutely simple act should stop thinking about us for one moment, then of course we would become, in that moment, nothing. So we'll call this radical contingency for a moment. But make no mistake about it. Inasmuch as there can only be one unconditioned reality, and inasmuch as at least one unconditioned reality exists, then that one unconditioned reality must not only be the creator of all else that is, it must be the continuous conserver in existence, the continuous creator of all else that is, and God better not stop thinking about us, or we're gone. We are radically dependent, that radically dependent. Now let's see if we can kind of get a sense then for the whole metaphysical world that St. Thomas Aquinas and others since his time have really tried to conceive. Because in a way, we've been proving God's existence with these concepts, but these concepts are really ways of helping us to speak about God. See, when we talk about God as absolutely simple, we have to start using analogy, right? Because we can't conceive of an act of absolute simplicity. We can't conceive of a pure acting power without any intrinsic or extrinsic boundaries. Every time we try to positively conceive it, we lose it, we finitize it. So what do we have to do? We have to literally back off. We have to literally use the via negativa. We don't want to get into pantheism either. Because we don't want to be saying something like, well, gosh, every being is somehow absorbed in God, or that beings somehow constitute God, because they really don't. What is in fact happening is God is compatible with every single being, since he's absolutely simple. And that means he can think of everything in one huge mentative act. Right? He doesn't have to have separate mentative acts to think of each condition. One mentative act can think of a zillion conjoined but differentiated beings. So God in one mentative act, which is different from himself, different from his own nature, God in one mentative act can therefore think into existence all of the rest of reality. Everything in reality except himself, because he is. He doesn't have a cause. He is pure being. He is not a conditioned reality. He is an unconditioned reality and doesn't need a cause. Now, sometimes some of my students get kind of mixed up here, and they say, well, wait a minute now. If everything has to have a cause, then why doesn't God have to have a cause? Well, nobody said everything had to have a cause. The only thing metaphysicians throughout the centuries ever said was any conditioned reality would have to have its conditions fulfilled. And then they said that any conditioned reality would have to have its conditions fulfilled not by an infinite set of conditions, but it would have to be done by a finite set of conditions, which had a terminating condition, which terminating condition was an unconditioned reality. That's what they said. So nobody ever started with a proposition, everything has to have a cause. It'd be an idiotic presupposition. What they started with was